Imagine signing up for a temporary summer job to make some extra cash before the semester starts. You are 20 years old, but instead of filing papers, you are suddenly stripped naked, forced into a smock-like frock, and locked behind the bars of a mock prison cell. The environment immediately turns hostile. You attempt a hunger strike to protest the treatment, and the guards respond by throwing you into solitary confinement, a dark closet they call the hole. When that fails, they try to physically jam food down your throat. These events occurred in 1971, staged deep in the basement of the Stanford University Psychology Department by researcher Philip Zimbardo. And perhaps the most surprising detail about the abuse inflicted during those 6 days is the official reaction to it. In 1973, the American Psychological Association investigated the study and concluded that it fully satisfied the profession's existing ethical standards. The mid-20th century was an entirely different frontier for psychological research. Institutions were so eager to map the human mind and uncover the mechanisms of human behavior that the basic, inherent rights of the test subjects were entirely eclipsed by the pursuit of data. The Stanford Prison Experiment was part of a larger pattern of unchecked scientific ambition. Researchers subjected children at a state-run orphanage to intense psychological pressure to induce stuttering, and secretly recorded the private deliberations of jurors without their knowledge. The backlash to these events eventually led to the creation of the Modern Institutional Review Board, or IRB, and strict human subjects protection programs. These bodies exist today specifically to ensure those abuses never happen again, which presents an interesting thought experiment. If Philip Zimbardo walked into a university ethics office today and submitted his exact 1971 experimental design for approval, what would the committee say? A modern audit would reject the study on two fronts: the immediate physical danger to the students and the research biases created when scientists interfere with the behavior they claim to be observing. The first pillar of modern ethical research is informed consent. A test subject has to know the specific risks they are signing up for, and they must retain the absolute right to withdraw from the study at any time for any reason. Zimbardo compromised this standard before the participants even reached the basement. To artificially inflate the realism of the simulation, students assigned to the prisoner role were unexpectedly arrested at their actual homes by real local police officers without any prior warning. Once inside, the psychological immersion was so heavy that participants lost perspective. Recent investigations, including a deep dive by journalist Ben Blum, revealed that the students genuinely felt trapped, believing the option to leave no longer existed. They resorted to desperate measures to escape. One prisoner, who famously suffered a severe mental breakdown during the study, later admitted he was entirely faking it. He just wanted to be released so he could go home and study for his graduate entrance exams. When researchers use deception to systematically strip away the perception of free will, the individuals in the room are no longer volunteers. They become literal hostages to the experiment. The second major hurdle in our audit concerns harm. Originating from the Nuremberg Code, modern researchers carry a strict mandate to minimize physical and psychological distress, particularly when working with vulnerable populations. Zimbardo openly admitted the severity of his design. The participants were subjected to high levels of stress 24 hours a day. The pressure was so intense that 5 of the young men suffered emotional breakdowns within the first 36 hours of the simulation. The student guards inflicted highly calculated humiliations to assert dominance. They forced their peers to strip naked, get down on all fours and act like dogs, and weaponized solitary confinement to break their resolve. You cannot design an environment where the explicit goal is to induce deep psychological suffering. Doing so directly violates the central tenet of human research ethics. Our final audit criteria addresses conflict of interest. Today's rules dictate that researchers must maintain a measured, objective distance from their subjects. Their primary job is to monitor safety and collect data, not to influence the outcome. This exposes the fatal architectural error of the entire project. Philip Zimbardo appointed himself both the principal investigator and the prison superintendent managing the facility. This destroyed his objectivity. Instead of watching natural behavior, the team went completely improv, actively directing guards, instructing them on how to act cruelly, and heavily manipulating the conditions to escalate the conflict. When a researcher steps into the environment to actively generate drama and provoke reactions, they cross a critical line. They stop recording a scientific experiment and start directing a stage play. Scholar Thibault Letexier describes the experiment as an exercise in deception. By coaching the guards to act aggressively, the researchers introduced demand characteristics, meaning the students weren't revealing their true nature, but were simply performing the roles they believed the scientists wanted to see. This manipulation makes the resulting data scientifically unusable. Relying on flawed science carries severe real-world consequences. Decades later, Zimbardo used his highly manipulated findings from the basement to defend the actions of actual U.S. military guards who pled guilty to abusing prisoners at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. It was the collective outrage over studies like this that ultimately forged the modern regulatory landscape. The ethical failures of the mid-20th century forced the creation of federal regulations, specifically the rules under Title 45, Part 46 of the Code of Federal Regulations. This law mandates that independent review boards, made up of medical experts, scientists, and everyday community members, must stand as a shield between a researcher's ambition and the human subject. They filter out the harm before the first data point is ever collected. The Stanford Prison Experiment ultimately served as the catalyst for a national regulatory system. It remains the primary historical proof that no pursuit of knowledge is ever worth sacrificing human dignity.